Your body still got chills when our eyes met in that bathroom mirror. 52 years of life, and I had never felt that mix of fear and desire before. There, with the party music muffled behind the door, I realized it wasn't too late to find out who I really was. Leave your like if you've ever felt like you're living the life others expect of you instead of your own. My name is Trevor Campbell. I'm a civil engineer, with salt and pepper hair at the temples and blue eyes that now see the world with a new curiosity. For decades, I built bridges, buildings, and a life based on other people's expectations. A neatly packaged existence. College, marriage to Jessica, 2 teenage kids, a house in the Boston suburbs. Everything exactly as my parents expected. As society expected. As I believed I wanted. Until 2 years ago, when a chance encounter made me question everything. I was coming back late from the office. It was raining. Daniel was standing at the bus shelter. 37 years old, leather jacket, cigarettes in his pocket. I offered him a ride. The conversation flowed in an almost eerie ease. Before I knew it, we were parking in front of a motel. What happened in that room was brief, intense, scary, and liberating. I got home at 3 in the morning to my sleeping wife who hadn't touched me with desire for years. To my carefully planned life that suddenly felt like a prison. It wasn't that night that destroyed my marriage. It was the 15 years before filled with silences, distances, and repressed desires. That night just showed me I couldn't pretend any longer. The divorce came 6 months later. Painful, but inevitable. Jessica deserved someone who could love her completely. I needed to discover who I truly was. My apartment on the 10th floor, in downtown Boston, is the first space I feel is really mine. Minimalist, practical, without the trappings Jessica insisted on collecting. Just the essentials. A few plants, my technical books, and hidden among them, romance novels I never allowed myself to read while married. What you hear here is just the beginning. The full, unfiltered stories, with all the details you can imagine, are available now. Check the link in the description right away. Every morning I wake up at 5:30. The ritual is precise. Stretching exercises, strong coffee, emails checked while I watch the city awaken through the panoramic window. The sound of traffic down below is constant, a reminder that life keeps moving. Unlike the stifling silence of the suburbs where every sigh seemed to echo off the walls. At the office by 7:30, I'm always the first one there. Campbell and Associates grows every year, my professional competence being the only constant through this personal turbulence. The blueprints, calculations, and meetings fill my days with a certainty that my personal life lacks. I have lunch alone, usually reviewing projects. I get home at 6, make something simple for dinner with a glass of red wine. I call my kids on our scheduled days. Conversations that are still awkward, but slowly getting better. On the alternate weekends they aren't with me, I walk along the Charles River, watching couples, families, people as lonely as I am, each following their own path through the city. This routine sustained me for almost 2 years. It wasn't unhappiness, but it wasn't joy either. It was existence, survival, until that Monday that changed everything again. Trevor, this is Zachary Peterson, our new structural engineering intern. He'll be under your direct supervision for the next 6 months. Sandra from HR smiled as she made the introductions in my office. I looked up from the blueprints I was reviewing, and my world slowed for a moment. Zachary was tall, with broad shoulders in a perfectly fitted navy suit. Neatly styled brown hair, alert green eyes. But it wasn't his looks that struck me. It was his presence. There was in him a quiet confidence that I rarely see in fresh college graduates. Mr. Campbell, it's a pleasure to meet you. His voice had a deep, controlled timbre. I read about your urban revitalization projects during my course. Your work in the port area is a benchmark. He extended his hand firmly. I felt an involuntary tremor in my arm when I shook it. Just call me Trevor, please. My voice sounded strange even to my own ears. Welcome to the team. After Sandra left, I showed Zachary his workstation, right next to mine. I explained the projects in progress, the expectations of the internship, the company procedures. He absorbed everything with careful attention, asking insightful questions that showed understanding beyond his experience. We'll begin with the Riverside project tomorrow, I explained. It's a residential complex with interesting challenges regarding sustainability and historical conservation. I read about it on the company website, replied Zachary. The zoning restrictions seem particularly challenging. I raised my eyebrows, surprised. You did your homework. He smiled briefly. Always. Over the following days, I realized that Zachary wasn't your typical intern. While I was methodical and traditional with my approaches, he brought innovative perspectives to our projects. His ease with sustainable technologies perfectly complemented my knowledge of classic engineering. When we disagreed about approaches, our discussions were stimulating and productive. What surprised me the most was how his presence subtly changed the atmosphere in the office. There was a lightness in the way he interacted with everyone, from the cleaning crew to the company president. And, inexplicably, I began to look forward to our daily interactions with an enthusiasm I hadn't felt in years. You have an eye for details that few interns have, I commented one afternoon while we were reviewing the structural calculations for the Riverside project. Zachary had pointed out an inconsistency that could have caused serious construction problems. I learn by watching you, he replied, a brief smile lighting his face. I felt an unexpected warmth rising in my neck and quickly redirected my attention to the documents. Gradually, our professional interaction evolved into occasional lunches. I found out that Zachary had been playing the guitar since he was 12 and had a passion for classic literature, mainly Hemingway and Fitzgerald. I told him about my newfound interest in Italian cooking, a hobby I picked up after the divorce as a form of therapy. My specialty is risotto, I confessed during lunch. It's meditative, you know? 20 minutes of constant stirring, slowly, adding broth. It's impossible to think about problems when you're focused on that. You should invite me for dinner sometime, replied Zachary casually, before shifting the conversation to the new structural analysis system we were implementing. That comment lingered between us, unacknowledged yet not forgotten. One night, we stayed late finalizing a crucial proposal for an important client. The office was deserted, only the lights from our workstations illuminating the space. Zachary got up to grab some coffee and stopped by my desk, looking at the photos of my kids. Are they teenagers now? He asked. Yes. Emily is 16. Alex is 14. Do they live with you? With their mother. I see them on alternate weekends. I hesitated, then added, we divorced 2 years ago. Zachary just nodded, without asking the usual follow-up questions, without judgment. He offered me a gentle smile that seemed to understand more than words could say. At that moment, I felt something shift between us, an open door to possibilities I hadn't dared to name. As the weeks went by, my inner conflicts intensified. In the moments of solitude in my apartment, I allowed myself to admit the attraction I felt for Zachary. The way my body responded to his proximity, how it looked for any excuse to extend our interactions. I remembered that night with Daniel, a meeting born out of curiosity and desperation, satisfying a physical need I'd repressed for decades. But what I felt for Zachary was different, more complex, not just desire, but a connection that went beyond the physical. The implications terrified me. The age difference, he was half my age. The professional relationship, I was his direct supervisor. The potential damage to my reputation at the company where I'd built my career. What am I feeling for Zachary? This question haunted me through sleepless nights as I watched the city lights from my room's window. The external complications didn't take long to appear. Thomas, the project's director, a 60-year-old conservative who valued tradition above all, began making comments about my unusual friendship with Zachary. It isn't good for team morale to see so much attention directed to a single intern, Campbell, he remarked during a management meeting. The others are noticing the favoritism. Zachary shows exceptional ability, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. It would be a waste not to develop his potential. Thomas stared at me for a long moment before changing the subject. I started keeping my distance from Zachary, cutting our lunches short, limiting our interactions to strictly professional matters. The confusion in his eyes was evident, but he accepted my distancing without question. Until one afternoon, when he found me alone in the copy room. Did I do something wrong? He asked directly, subtly blocking my exit. Of course not, I replied quickly. Just a lot of work lately. Trevor. The way he said my name, soft, almost intimate, made my stomach clench. If you prefer, I request another supervisor. I can talk to HR. No. The word came out louder than I intended. I lowered my voice. That isn't necessary. I just need to set clearer boundaries. Zachary nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. I understand boundaries. But I also know when someone is running from themselves. He left before I could respond, leaving me with the uncomfortable feeling of having been completely transparent to someone I hardly knew for 3 months. Someone who seemed to see truths about me that I was only just starting to accept. The birthday party for Campbell and Associates takes place every year at the Elegant River Lounge, a bar on the 30th floor of one of the skyscrapers our company helped design. It's a tradition I normally avoid, limiting myself to a brief appearance, shaking the necessary hands, and discreetly leaving. But that year, something made me stay. Maybe it was the way Zachary navigated the social scene with that natural confidence that fascinated me so much. In his perfectly fitted black suit, he moved among groups of colleagues, making veterans laugh, with clever observations, winning over directors with insightful questions about past projects. His occasional laughter carried across the room, reaching me even amid conversations I pretended to follow. Thomas approached, sipping his whiskey, eyes fixed on Zachary. "Charismatic kid, your intern," he commented, a tone in his voice I couldn't quite place. "Well-connected too. I heard his father is an architecture professor at Princeton." "I didn't know that," I replied, feeling an irrational pang of jealousy that Thomas knew a detail about Zachary I was unaware of. Interesting that he never mentioned it. Thomas gave me a sidelong look. "Are you sure you know your protégé well, Campbell?" Before I could answer, Thomas was called away by another group, leaving his insinuations hanging in the air. I took another sip of my red wine, watching Zachary from a distance. How many other things did I not know about him? How many layers were there still to uncover? After 3 glasses of wine, the room began to feel too small. The hum of conversations, the background music, the laughter, everything intensified, pressing against my ears. I needed a moment to collect my thoughts. The River Lounge's bathroom is one of those absurdly luxurious places. Black marble, soft and indirect lighting, private stalls that look more like small suites. I rested my hands on the sink, watching, my reflection in the mirror. The face staring back at me looked at once familiar and strange, deeper expression lines than I remembered, eyes with a vulnerability I rarely allowed to show. The door opened silently behind me. In the mirror, our eyes met. Zachary entered, closing the door with a soft click that seemed to echo in the marble-lined space. "I thought you had left," he said, coming over to wash his hands at the basin, next to mine. His cologne filled my senses, citrus notes with a woody base that seemed to intensify with the warmth of his body. "I just needed a moment," I replied, noticing how hoarse my words sounded, as if I hadn't spoken in hours. Zachary turned off the tap, but didn't move away. Our shoulders nearly touched, the proximity sending waves of heat through my skin, even through the layers of clothing. "You've been distant lately," he observed, his voice low and intimate in the confined space. "Is it because of me?" I felt my breath quicken. His direct question, so typical of him, left no room for evasion. "Not like that," I finally replied, turning to face him directly, without the mediation of the mirror. "It's complicated." Zachary stepped closer, eliminating the little space that still separated us. "It doesn't have to be." The air between us charged with an almost tangible electricity. I studied the details of his face as never before. The soft curve of his lips, the defined line of his jaw, the faint blush on his cheeks. I felt my fingers trembling slightly as I adjusted my tie, a nervous gesture I couldn't control. "Zachary, I'm your supervisor," I argued in a last attempt to keep some sense. "There's decades between us. I'm older than your parents probably are. And do you think that matters to me?" His reply came without hesitation, his firm voice contrasting with the fragility I felt. "I see you, Trevor. not your age, not your title. Those words, "I see you," shattered my last defenses. How many decades had I lived without truly being seen? How many years had I spent hiding parts of myself to fit the expectations of others? Zachary slowly raised his hand as if approaching a frightened animal. He hesitated for a moment, his eyes searching mine for permission. Then, gently, his fingers touched my face, tracing the line of my jaw with a tenderness that made my throat tighten with emotion. Time seemed to stand still. There was only our synchronized breathing, the soft sound of distant music filtering through the door, and that indescribable warmth of a touch that seemed to awaken every nerve ending in my body. In all my life, I had never felt so terrified, or so alive. If anyone ever asks me about the exact moment when my life changed irrevocably, I will say it was when Zachary's lips finally met mine in that luxurious bathroom. It started with tenderness, a hesitant, almost reverent touch, as if he were giving me one last chance to back away, to return to the safety of the life I knew. But instead of pushing him away, my hands found his waist, drawing him closer as the kiss deepened, turning into something urgent, hungry. Years of repressed desire, decades of denial, all converging in that moment. Every barrier I had built, over the years, crumbled under the touch of his hands, under the heat of his mouth. Somehow, we moved to the most secluded booth, with the door locked behind us. Zachary's hands unfastened my tie as his lips found my neck, sending shivers down my spine. I closed my eyes, surrendering to the sensations that overwhelmed me. "I've been thinking about this for weeks," he confessed between kisses, his voice a husky whisper against my skin. I couldn't respond with words, only with urgent touches, hands exploring his body through the thin fabric of his suit, feeling the firm muscles, the warmth radiating from him. When his fingers began unbuttoning my shirt, I felt a wave of vulnerability mixed with desire, exposing my middle-aged body, marked by time, to someone so young and perfect. But when I looked into his eyes, I saw nothing but admiration and pure desire, with no trace of judgment. "You are exactly as I imagined," he murmured, his words so sincere they chased away any insecurity. What happened next was like a symphony, movements complementing each other, rhythms rising and falling, taking us to heights I had never experienced. My hands mapped every inch of his body, memorizing each reaction, each sigh. The meticulous control I had always maintained over every aspect of my life completely dissolved, replaced by an absolute surrender to the present moment. Zachary guided me with a surprising confidence for someone his age, finding places on my body I didn't know could spark so much pleasure. There was a silent communication between us, a mutual understanding of needs and desires that transcended words. When the climax finally hit us, it was as if the entire universe condensed into that small space between us. I held onto Zachary tightly, as if fearing that if I let go, this moment would slip away. We stayed like that, gasping for breath, our bodies entwined in the limited space, the reality of the outside world temporarily forgotten. It was different from the encounter with Daniel 2 years earlier. That had been purely physical, the satisfaction of a curiosity repressed for decades, with no real emotional connection. But this, with Zachary, was like discovering a part of myself that had always existed, only waiting for the right moment to emerge. We slowly separated, adjusting, our clothes in silence. There was no embarrassment, just a newly discovered intimacy lingering between us. When our eyes met again, I saw on Zachary's face a smile that mixed satisfaction and promise, as if that moment was only the beginning of something much bigger. "We need to go back," I whispered, the reality of the party and our colleagues, beyond that door, finally seeping into my mind. Zachary nodded, but before we left, he cupped my face in his hands and kissed me again, this time with a tenderness that hit me even deeper than the earlier passion. That wasn't just... He hesitated, searching for the right words. "A moment for me, Trevor. You know that, right?" Those words echoed inside me, stirring emotions I couldn't quite name. It wasn't just physical desire. There was something deeper I still couldn't fully define. "I know," I finally replied, surprised by the certainty in my voice. It isn't just for me either. In our profession, we learn about critical stress points, moments when the applied pressure permanently changes the form of a material. Leaving that bathroom, walking separately so as not to raise suspicions, I realized I had reached my own critical point. There was no going back to the way things were. The transformation was irreversible. Standing in front of the bathroom mirror, looking at my reflection, I noticed a subtle change. My eyes seemed different, livelier, more present. I adjusted my tie with still trembling fingers, trying to regain composure before facing the room full of colleagues. Zachary was by my side, a slight smile playing on his lips, which were still slightly swollen from the kisses exchanged minutes before. His reflection in the mirror seemed to radiate a serenity that sharply contrasted with the storm of emotions I was trying to control. "We have to get back to the party before anyone notices," I said, noting how my voice sounded different, huskier, more vulnerable. "Yes," he agreed, but remained still, his eyes not leaving mine in the mirror. "That wasn't just a moment for me, Trevor. You know that, right?" Those words carried a weight I could physically feel, a promise, a responsibility, a possibility. The encounter with Daniel 2 years ago had been an explosion of repressed curiosity, a furtive experiment. But this with Zachary had an entirely different meaning. There was connection, substance, a potential that both terrified and fascinated me at the same time. "I know," I replied after a moment of reflection. "It isn't just for me either." We returned to the party separately, with a few minutes between our exits. Back in the hall, the music seemed louder, the lights brighter, the conversations more animated, as if the world had gained a new sensory dimension. I watched Zachary from across the room, chatting casually with colleagues from the design department as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But when our eyes briefly met above flutes of champagne and groups of people, I felt that invisible connection, that shared secret that now bound us in a way that no one else could ever understand. The party went on for another 2 hours, during which I maintained professional conversations, discussed future projects, exchanged pleasantries, all while part of my mind remained in that bathroom, reliving every touch, every sensation. When I finally said goodbye and walked to the parking lot, I felt simultaneously exhausted and electrified. Driving home, the nighttime streets of Boston looked different, more vibrant, full of possibilities. Or maybe it was me who was different. The next day, I arrived at the office at the usual time, anxious and unsure about facing Zachary after what had happened. When he entered, right on time at 8:30, our eyes met for a brief moment before he headed to his desk with a perfectly professional, "Good morning." The morning meeting went on as normal, except for the moment when Zachary handed me a folder and our fingers brushed briefly, an apparently casual contact that sent a burst of warmth through my body. I watched him present his analysis of the Riverside project, articulate and confident in front of the directors, and I felt a pride that went beyond professional satisfaction. In the days that followed, we developed a silent language, made of discreet glances, seemingly accidental touches during meetings, fingers meeting as documents were passed, knees brushing under the conference table. Professional lunches stretched, longer than necessary, and discussions about structural projects naturally evolved into personal topics. The work messages on my phone gradually began to include details unrelated to engineering. Final report done. Sending it now. I thought of you when I heard that Leonard Cohen song in the car this morning. Meeting with suppliers confirmed for Thursday at 2 p.m. I finished reading Hemingway last night, and now I understand why you admire him so much. During one particularly stressful afternoon, after a tough presentation for demanding clients, Zachary entered my office when everyone else had already left. "You handled their objections brilliantly," he commented, closing the door behind him. "Years of practice," I replied, rubbing my tired eyes. "But thank you." He came over, placing his hands on my tense shoulders, and started giving a gentle massage. I should have resisted. We were in the office and anyone could have walked in. But the relief was immediate, and I allowed myself to close my eyes for a moment. "We need to be careful," I murmured, even though I didn't make any move to push him away. "I always am," he replied, his fingers finding exactly the right points on my shoulders. In every sense. That phrase stayed with me for the rest of the day, the implication that he was aware of the risks, of the complications, of the possible consequences. He wasn't acting on impulse or passing curiosity. There was an intentionality in his actions that both intrigued and comforted me. 1 week after the party, I received a message at 10 p.m. "Still awake?" I replied immediately, "Yes." "Can I call you?" It was our first non-work-related phone conversation. We talked for almost 2 hours, about music, literature, philosophy, travel, about our families, friends, and formative experiences. I learned that his father, the Princeton professor Thomas had mentioned, had abandoned the family when Zachary was only 12, that his mother, a nurse, had raised 3 children on her own while working night shifts, that he had earned scholarships through persistence and hard work, that his past experiences with older men had been disappointing, relationships based on power and convenience, not genuine connection. "It's different with you," he confessed, his voice soft over the phone. "From the first day, I felt that you truly see me, not just as a young body or a useful intern. You listen to me, challenge me intellectually, and respect my ideas." Those words stirred an emotion I couldn't completely control. "I don't know what we're doing, Zachary," I admitted. "I don't know where this is headed." "Do we need to know now?" he asked, the simplicity of his question disarming my worries. "Can't we just explore this, day by day?" After that night, the calls became part of our routine. Messages during the day, conversations at night. At the office, we kept a flawless professionalism. Even Thomas seemed satisfied with the apparently renewed distance we maintained publicly. What surprised me most was how, gradually, I stopped feeling guilt or shame. For the first time in my life, I experienced an emotional honesty I had never known before. It wasn't just the physical aspect. It was the feeling of finally allowing myself to be seen and known at my core. Not having to hide parts of myself to be accepted. Sitting alone in my apartment on a Friday night, 3 weeks after the party, I looked out at the city lights through the window. I remembered how I felt in this same place just a month ago. The feeling of existing without really living, of surviving without thriving. The change was profound, not only in my mood, but in how I saw the world around me. My phone buzzed with a message. "Looking at the same city you are now, from a different angle, thinking of you." I smiled at the screen, imagining Zachary in his apartment on the other side of Boston, also contemplating the urban lights. I replied, "I wish you were here." His response was immediate. "I can be there in 30 minutes. That was the first time I would have Zachary in my private space, my territory, my refuge. As I waited, I nervously rearranged some books, made sure there was wine, changed my shirt twice. I acted like a teenager before a first date, not like a 52-year-old man with decades of experiences behind him. The doorbell rang at 11:15 p.m. When I opened the door, there he was, dark jeans, a simple t-shirt, a leather jacket. Younger, more vulnerable without his formal office attire. His eyes met mine with an intensity that made my heart race. "May I come in?" he asked with a half-smile. "Please," I replied, stepping aside. As he passed by me, his familiar cologne filled my senses, evoking vivid memories of the River Lounge bathroom. Zachary slowly looked around my apartment, taking in the details, running his fingers over the books on the shelf, checking out the view from the panoramic window. "It's exactly as I imagined," he finally commented, turning to me. "Really?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Organized, elegant without being flashy, personal, but not overly sentimental." He smiled. "Just like you." I offered him wine, which he accepted. We sat on the couch, initially maintaining a cautious distance, chatting. About the week, about work, about nothing in particular. Gradually, that gap closed. My hand found his fingers intertwined with mine. When we finally kissed, it was different from the urgent kiss in the bathroom. This one was gentle, exploratory, full of promises. There was no rush of risk or the forbidden, just 2 people in a private space, discovering each other. "I don't want to rush anything," I murmured against his lips. Zachary pulled back slightly, holding my face in his hands. "Trevor," he said, my name sounding as precious as ever in his voice. "I've been waiting for you since day one. There's no hurry. We have all the time in the world." That night, Zachary stayed. And when I woke up the next morning with him, asleep next to me, the golden light of dawn outlining his profile, I realized I had definitely crossed a line. Not just in terms of sexuality or relationship, but in my entire life. I had chosen authenticity over convention, vulnerability over safety, truth over comfort. And for the first time in decades, I felt at peace with my choices. A month went by, since that first night in my apartment. Every day brought new revelations. About Zachary, about myself, about us as, well, we still hadn't defined exactly what we were. And maybe that was part of the beauty of what we shared. The absence of labels, the freedom to simply live in the moment. At the office, we maintained our impeccable professional facade. No one besides us knew that many nights he didn't return to his own apartment, or that we spent entire weekends exploring the city together. Museums I never had time to visit, tiny restaurants he discovered in outlying neighborhoods, long walks along the river where our hands occasionally met when we were sure we were alone. One afternoon, Thomas called me to his office. His serious look made my stomach tighten. "Campbell, Peterson's internship period is coming to an end," he began, tapping his fingers on an evaluation folder. My heart raced. "We've received exceptional feedback about his performance, not just from you, but from all the departments he's worked with." I nodded cautiously, unsure where this conversation was heading. "We're considering offering him a permanent position," Thomas continued. "The sustainability department is expanding with the new federal contracts. They need fresh talent and innovative ideas." "Sustainability," I repeated, processing the information. "Not structural engineering?" Thomas studied me for what felt like too long. "I thought you'd be happy. He'll have the opportunity to grow there, and it definitely wouldn't be appropriate for him to continue directly under your supervision indefinitely. Don't you agree?" The tone of his voice, the specific wording, the piercing look. Everything suggested that Thomas suspected something. I forced myself to maintain eye contact, keeping a neutral expression. "Of course," I replied calmly. "If that's what he wants, I'd be happy for him." "Excellent. Sanvi will talk to him tomorrow about the offer." Thomas closed the folder. "You've trained the young man well, Campbell. A credit to the department." I left his office feeling uncomfortably exposed, as if Thomas had seen right through the layers of professionalism I had so carefully built up. But another feeling prevailed. The realization that this change might be beneficial. Zachary would no longer be my direct subordinate. The ethical conflict that troubled me so much would be eliminated. That night, I invited Zachary to dinner at my apartment. While I was cooking fresh pasta, an Italian recipe I perfected during my lonely post-divorce years, I told him about my conversation with Thomas. "They're offering you the sustainability department," I said, adding some white wine to the sauce I was preparing. "Sanvi will talk to you about it tomorrow." "Yes," Zachary confirmed, leaning against the kitchen counter. "She mentioned it earlier today and asked me to keep it under wraps until the offer is formalized." I turned from the stove to face him. "Did you already know? Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I wanted to wait for the right moment," he explained, coming up to taste the sauce. "Delicious." I continued stirring the sauce, trying to gather my thoughts. The jazz music I'd put on in the background filled the silence that had settled between us. "It would be a good move for your career," I finally offered. "It's the fastest-growing department in the company. And it would mean not working directly with you anymore." Zachary finished the unspoken thought, his eyes studying my reaction. I turned off the heat, covering the saucepan while I faced him completely. What we have, started in a way I never planned, under circumstances that aren't ideal professionally. "Do you regret it?" he asked directly, his intense green eyes fixed on me in the soft light of the apartment. "No," I replied immediately, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "Not for a second. But I also don't want to compromise your future, Zachary. You're just starting your career. You have amazing potential." Zachary set his glass on the counter and came closer, gently touching my face in a way that still completely disarmed me. "Trevor, When are you going to understand that I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions? That I entered all of this with my eyes wide open? There are so many complications, I insisted, even though my body was already responding to his touch, leaning in toward him like a plant reaching for the sun. The age difference, the job, my kids. Who still don't know about you, he added. It wasn't an accusation, just an observation. I'm planning to tell them, I replied. I just need the right moment. Zachary studied me for a moment, then slowly nodded. I understand. I'm not pressuring you, you know that. I just want you to understand, I'm not here on impulse, or fleeting curiosity. He extended his hand, covering mine on the counter. And what if I want more than just my career? What if I want to see where this between us can go? My heart raced at those words. The possibility of something lasting with Zachary, something beyond stolen moments and carefully calculated interactions, both terrified and fascinated me. Are you sure that's what you really want? I asked, intertwining my fingers with his. The smile that lit up his face was answer enough. We finished dinner with lighter conversations and occasional laughs, the earlier tension dissolving. Later, when Zachary gently pressed me against the sheets in my bed, I once again let myself lose control, surrendering completely to the moment without fear of tomorrow. The next morning, I woke up before him. I lay there watching him sleep, the first light of dawn streaming in through the slightly open curtains, casting golden patterns on his skin. The vulnerability of that moment, Zachary asleep beside me, trusting me completely, awakened a tenderness I wasn't prepared to feel. I never planned to fall in love again. Certainly not with a man 27 years my junior. But there, in that quiet morning, I had to admit to myself, I was completely, irrevocably involved. When Zachary formally accepted the position in the sustainability department, we celebrated quietly. The transition was smooth. We still saw each other daily at the office, occasionally collaborating on projects that connected our departments, but without the supervisor-subordinate dynamic that had troubled me so much ethically. In our private lives, we gradually created routines. Movie nights at his more modest apartment on the south side of the city. Weekends at my place, where we cooked together and talked for hours. I discovered his taste for vintage jazz that surprisingly matched mine. He introduced me to contemporary authors I had long ignored, independent films I would never have watched alone. 6 months passed like this, in a bubble of discoveries and growing intimacy. Until one Sunday afternoon, while walking through a public garden, Zachary made a suggestion that caught me off guard. I was thinking of taking a few days off next month, he remarked casually, as we watched an elderly couple feeding pigeons on a nearby bench. Maybe a trip to Maine. Bar Harbor is supposed to be gorgeous in the fall. That sounds nice, I replied, picturing him enjoying a coastal landscape. I thought maybe you'd like to come with me, he added, his tone still casual, but his eyes searching mine with intensity. Our first trip together. The suggestion hung between us, loaded with meaning. One thing was meeting in our private apartments, another was entirely different. Traveling together, staying as a couple, presenting ourselves to the world as what we really were. It's a lot to consider, I know, Zachary continued in the face of my silence. Think about it. I don't need an answer right away. But as we continued our walk, the idea took root. The image of the two of us strolling on rocky beaches, sharing meals at little seaside restaurants, waking up together, to the sound of the waves. It was enchanting in a way I couldn't ignore. Yes, I finally replied when we were heading back to the car. I want to go with you. Zachary's smile, open, radiant, unreserved, made my heart tighten with an emotion I was just beginning to name. That night, while Zachary slept beside me, I got up quietly. My apartment was dark, only the city lights casting shadows on the familiar furniture. I picked up my laptop and sat at the kitchen table. I opened a new video file and turned on the camera. It's funny looking back now, I began, slightly adjusting the camera angle. If someone had told me 3 years ago that I'd be here, sharing this story with you, I would have either laughed or maybe even panicked. I smiled at the camera, feeling more at ease in my own skin than I ever had before. Zachary accepted the position in the sustainability department. It's been 6 months now. We've been discreet at work, professional, but outside of it. I paused, an involuntary smile appearing on my lips. I'm learning that there isn't a right time to discover yourself. Sometimes life hands you opportunities for honesty and growth when you least expect them. It isn't always easy. My kids are still adjusting to the idea. Some old friends have drifted away. But for the first time, I'm living my truth, not the version of myself I thought I should be. I leaned a little forward, as if sharing a secret with future viewers. Zachary and I decided to take a weekend in Maine next month. Our first trip together. If you want to hear more about it, leave a comment. This channel was supposed to be just about engineering tips and project management, but it seems it evolved into something more personal. I glanced briefly down the dark corridor, leading to the room where Zachary slept, and smiled again. I have to go now. If this story resonated with you in any way, if you're also on a journey of self-discovery, no matter your age, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Let's see what comes next together. I turned off the recording, watching the screen for a moment. This video would be my first public step, my declaration of who I truly am. An act of courage that would have seemed unthinkable just a few months ago. I closed the laptop and went back to the bedroom. Zachary had turned in his sleep, his arm extended over the space I'd left empty. I slipped back into bed, and he instinctively wrapped me in his arms, murmuring something indistinct against my shoulder. What you hear here is just the beginning. The full, unfiltered stories with all the details you can imagine are available now. Check the link in the description right away! I let myself sink into that embrace, into that unconditional acceptance I never expected to find, especially not at 52 years old. The journey here had been long, winding, and often painful. But as I fell asleep in Zachary's arms, I felt a quiet certainty. I was exactly where I was meant to be. Finally, I was home,